Hello, everybody. Hello to all who listen to us on different digital platforms. I welcome you all to an Inside Turkey panel entitled as The Role of External Actors in the Libyan Crisis. I will be moderating the panel. I'm editor-in-chief of Inside Turkey Journal. As Inside Turkey team, we have published a special issue on the Libyan crisis, mainly focusing on the role of external powers that they play in the crisis. We have covered domestic political developments in Libya, such as the process of political settlement, the reconstruction efforts, and the security sector. We have also focused on the role of regional and global powers, such as Turkey, France, the European Union, the United Arab Emirates, and many neighboring countries. First of all, I want to say a few words about our journal, Inside Turkey. It is an academic, a policy-oriented academic journal, mainly focusing on Turkey, on Turkish domestic and foreign policy, on the political developments in the Middle East, and it also covers any academic articles and commentaries written about the neighboring regions such as Central Asia and the Balkans and other regions. It has been 22 years that we have been on the academic market. So it is one of the most well-known journals published in Turkey, one of the few which is published in English language. Second, I want to thank the distinguished speakers of the panel for their contribution to this special issue of Inside Turkey and to this panel. Dr. Yahya Zubir, Dr. Juma El-Gamaty, Dr. Timmy Tureit, and Dr. Tariq Mejrisi. Before giving the floor to the speakers, I want to have a few sentences regarding the Libyan. That Libya is one of the most interesting fronts of the Arab Spring, that is the Arab insurgencies and revolutions. Unfortunately, the state was disintegrated into a severe civil war and a regional crisis, especially after the intensive intervention of some external powers and their exploitation of the situation on the ground. At the end, Libya, unfortunately, the Libyan state has mainly divided into two. That is the UN-recognized legitimate government based in Tripoli and the challenger, the putschist general, General Haftar, Khalifa Haftar, who is based in the eastern part of the country. So today in this panel, we'll discuss the determinative role of external powers in this civil war. So we have four distinguished speakers. First of all, I want to give the first floor to Yahya Zubir, who is a scholar working for Keough Business School in France and Brookings Doha Center in Qatar. He will mainly focus on the role and the intervention of the regional countries on the Libyan crisis. Dr. Yahya Zubir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being with you, and thank you again for the opportunity to write, to contribute the article to the special issue. Libya is a very challenging topic, interesting, and I hope that during this discussion we can enlighten the audience as to the particular situation in Libya. I would start by saying that Libya is quite important by its geopolitical situation, being in not only in North Africa, but in the Mediterranean coast, of which it has a big line, borders important countries as well, strong and weak. Egypt on the east and Algeria in the west, and then the weaker states in the Sahel region and so on. So Libya is quite a rich state, and that would explain the interest, not only the geopolitical position of Libya, but also its wealth. That is also one of the attractions, if you wish, or the attractive nature of the foreign powers to be in Libya. I always argue that the intervention of the outside powers has not begun in the last few years, but it had happened within around the time that beginning with the uprising of 2011, with the intervention of NATO, and you could see even then the different interests that were appearing, whether it's the United States or France, which was pushing really hard for that war, actually not just a war, but the regime change, as it turned out. So basically, I would start with the argument that the overthrow of Gaddafi had nothing to do with the R2P, or human rights, but regime change was the underlying reason for the intervention, which left the country in a sort of shambles, and that eventually, with that particular domestic situation, the foreign powers found a way of intervening. First, despite the fact that they left the country in shambles, they made no effort to rebuild. There was no reconstruction process in Libya. Every other attempt failed, and we ended with two separate governments. To make things simple, to say that there are two: one in Tripoli, like Dr. Mahedin indicated earlier, which is recognized by the international community, and then another one in the east. And to make matters worse, and that's, I think, important to mention, is the emergence of a rogue marshal, Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar, who had begun some military operations in Libya. And so every outside power tried to accommodate him because of what he claimed to represent, basically, the war on terrorism or what have you. But what is interesting when analyzing the interference or the presence of outside powers in Libya is their different interests. They all have stakes in the country, and that's what I tried to do in researching for that paper, to see what were the interests of each party involved in Libya, whether it is the UAE or France or Russia, and so on. So again, that intervention left the country in shambles, and I would also argue that sadly, most foreign powers in Libya do not really care about the domestic situation, in the sense the humanitarian situation, because hundreds of thousands of Libyans had been internally displaced or left the country because of the conflict. You have tens of thousands of refugees, and then there's in a sense, we're faced with a collapsed state, and with hundreds of militias present, which are used by one part or the other. I am not sure whether I would say there are it's a proxy war. I would say it's a sort of, there are some rivalries between states that rivalries which were already existing, like the one between the UAE and Turkey, or Turkey and Egypt, and that those rivalries spilled over onto Libya, just like what happened also in Syria to a lesser degree. So again, none of the actors have respected the arms embargo that had been in place. And so I would say, and I may shock people when I say it, the only legitimate presence in Libya, foreign presence, would be Turkey's, and I'll explain why. Obviously, Turkey, because it was invited by a legitimate government to come on its behalf. Usually, when I deal with the French intervention, I would always raise the question: why is it that the French, reacted so harshly towards Turkey, when in fact, France intervened legitimately or legally in Mali, for instance, in 2013, because the government in place had invited it to come and to defend it against the advance of some terrorist groups coming from the north. So again, my argument is because of this varied interests, which back one or the other side in the conflict, this has continued unabated and has prevented a definitive solution in Libya. So this is really one of the core arguments in terms of in explaining the ongoing situation in Libya. So we have not only sort of a quasi-civil war, but there are different interests that would do not show any desire to break the status quo or to bring about a definitive solution. Even if you look at what's going on today, there's still, although there is a tenuous ceasefire, but there are parties that would like it, would like to see the conflict reemerge, and we've started seeing some of that. So again, not only I think it's a point that should be stated that the political elites, the Libyan political elites, are as much to blame about what's going on in the country as the foreign states that have intervened. So, in a nutshell, we have two parties in some way. To simplify, we have foreign power support Haftar, which are Egypt, the UAE, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia with financial support, not military support directly. Then Russia and France. These are more, or you can add to it Jordan and some others, but they are not as important as the ones I just stated. And on the other side, there's Turkey, Qatar, and Italy, which show clear support for the GNA, the Government of National Accord. So what I did in the research was to try to look at what interest did each side have in the country. And of course, I think it's reasonable to start with Egypt, which has strategic interests in Libya, and those interests don't date from the current situation, but from way back. There were those frictions, near conflict, and so on. But it's a neighbor that shares about 700 miles of borders with Libya. The tensions had occurred even in pre-revolution Libya. But particularly since the fall of Gaddafi and the experience with the Muslim Brotherhood, things sort of heated up and the tensions grew, especially under Sisi's Egypt, which is conducting an all-out war against Islamism, which, you know, in the case of Egypt, it would be the Muslim Brotherhood, which it considers as a terrorist party. So why does Egypt support Haftar? Is this claim that he's fighting terrorism? That is very appealing to Egypt. But there are, again, I cannot go into all the details, but you have for Egypt, having Cyrenaica, the region close to Egypt, being controlled by call it a dictator or strong man in their eyes, especially where all the oil is located, is quite appealing to Egypt, which sees again this presence of Haftar in the region as a buffer against jihadist groups. And so again, and it's also because in the West there is this perception, true or false, I would let my colleagues discuss that, but to see the GNA as being pro-Muslim Brotherhood, that adds to the justification for supporting Haftar. But I think that in the case of Egypt, it's not only political or geopolitical considerations. You also have very serious economic consideration that come to play, which is the cheap Libyan oil, especially since the Libyan National Army, Haftar's army, was controlling the eastern part, which is, as you know, rich in oil. If for those who know the history of the relationship between Egypt and Libya under Gaddafi, there used to be you know, a workforce, you know, a lot of migrant workers and so on that sent remittances to Egypt, which was suffering like today, you know, from unemployment in its country or its overpopulation. So. As I said, there are economic interests that one has to keep in mind. I would argue that Turkey's intervention in Libya has destroyed, in a sense, all the calculations that Egypt had, because when Haftar was advancing towards the west and to defeat the GNA and establish control over the whole territory, well, that did not happen, and that was due to the effectiveness of Turkey's, you know, technologies, you know, the UAVs that proved rather effective in stopping the advance. So. But again, one has to look at the interest that Turkey has, and Turkey has not just the support for the GNA for you know, to establish friendly relations or for legality, but also because it has economic interests, and they are legitimate economic interests, because even under Gaddafi, Turkey had invested considerably, and with the revolution, it had lost. Well, it has some assets in Libya that it would like to recoup. But it is also the rivalry that it has with Egypt. Not necessarily, that was not necessarily the reason why Turkey went into Libya, but it has more to do, especially following the signing of the MOU with the GNA in November 2019 regarding the demarcation of the new maritime jurisdictions between the two, and Turkey has also some interest in the exploitation of the gas, oil and gas, in the Eastern Mediterranean, and so a presence in Libya is of great interest. So Turkey has played really a considerable, I mean, a consequential role in preventing the collapse of Tripoli and undermining the advance, the interest rather, not just of Haftar or Egypt, but also of Russia and whoever was pushing, including France and the UAE, which were pushing Haftar to take over Tripoli. I know how much time do I have? How much more time?
Sir, you have 2-3 minutes, please.
Okay.
If you can.
Okay. Yeah. Again, I will go back to the. I mean, I will continue with Turkey. As I said, there are economic interests that Turkey has, but also geopolitical interests. The presence in Libya is also triggered by the agreement between Cyprus, Israel, and Egypt, and so on the gas deal. So this motivates the presence of Turkey in Libya, and I think in the neighborhood, because there are others who have a real interest, the regional players like Algeria and Tunisia, and they have mixed feelings about Turkey's presence. But I think that what some research shows recently is that they were not too unhappy with Turkey having stopped the advance of Haftar towards Tripoli. As far as the Tunisia and Algeria is concerned, I know for a fact that there were some disagreements within the states, between Algeria and within Algeria itself and within Tunisia itself about what Turkey's intervention meant. I saw that my colleague Tim is going to do France, so I'm going to skip France. And I mentioned already about France, which has economic interest, but has a double game. On the one hand, saying it wants a resolution of the conflict, but on the other hand, it violates, the embargo. And I think it's very simple. It tries to secure some part of the economic pie for Total, for the old company Total, and so on. So I'll let Tim discuss this, so I can go to some other. Since I have a few minutes left, I will go to Russia. Russia also claims that it's not involved directly. It uses, the Wagner group in Libya. So it denies any involvement, but we all know that it supplies weapons to the very same group, this Wagner group, and so on. But Russia is playing also a sort of interesting, balanced way. Though it had given support to Haftar, it also plays the GNA card and would like to be seen as a mediator, especially after the defeat of Haftar in 2020, in this past year. Now we see more involvement of Russia there. But what are the reasons for Russia to be in Libya? Well, it wants to really, first and foremost, to enhance its regional stature as a diplomatic facilitator, but also consolidate its infrastructure contract, because Russia, just like Turkey or like China for that matter, had lost lots of its investments in Libya following the revolution. But it's also its presence is also to undermine Western and what it perceives as Western and U.S. hegemony, while promoting some sort of insecurity in the country. So that is Russia has. There were accusations that Russia is building a port, a naval base, and so on. I don't think it's true, but it would be in its interest to to have such a base, because the only base it has in a warm water is in Syria, but it would like if it could have something similar. The other player, and I promise to stop here, is the UAE. The UAE, which we see is involved not only in Libya, and now it's moving farther west, especially since this Abraham Accords, where it is more present in Morocco, providing Morocco with lots of funding to fight the Sahrawi, national liberation movement, and it's really playing quite a role, although it's quite far from the region. But it has for years intervened in Libya, and it has no borders with Libya. But it seems that the UAE is, despite its size, it's trying to establish some sort of regional empire, and at the same time crushing any attempts at democratic movements arising in the region, and what it perceives also, especially the Muslim Brotherhood in the region. So it's quite an interesting role, and the UAE has tried to undo revolutions, and of course this has created fears in Tunisia, where a democratic process had begun. So it remains to be seen what they would do. So in order to achieve that objective, the UAE has supported Haftar, has provided the weaponry for him to fight, and of course it also helps Egypt to help Haftar. At the same time, it has used its air force to support Haftar, so it's playing also a role which many in the region see as a negative role, especially recently with its normalization with Israel. So to conclude, I would just say that as long as the outside powers are playing this kind of violating the embargo, not supporting a serious or genuine ceasefire in the region, I'm afraid that the conflict will continue, because they can always find forces within the country itself that are divided. So the divisions within Libya facilitate the intervention of the foreign powers in the country. I'm sorry if I went over my allotted time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Zubair, for this broad and comprehensive presentation. Dr. Zubair has just mentioned that generally external powers do not take the humanitarian dimension, especially, and generally domestic politics into consideration. However, the second presentation will focus on a country probably which to me take this into consideration, that is Dr. El-Gamaty will discuss Turkey's role in the reconstruction of Libya. Probably there are too many things going on the ground, and it has been contributing to both the rebuilding of the state institutions and the reconstruction of the infrastructure and other economic sectors in Tripoli and its surrounding regions. Now I want to give the floor to Dr. Gamaty for his presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Ataman, and thank you to SETA for having me again. It's always a pleasure to be with you. As you mentioned, my contribution in the last issue of Inside Turkey was entitled Turkey's Role in the Reconstruction of Libya. And although Dr. Zubair has already touched on some of the points, because he was, I think, covering broadly all the major countries who were involved in Libya recently. My contribution now, or my talk, will focus and zoom in mainly on Turkey and Libya, and what role can Turkey play. But let me start by a small introduction, by asking a question. Why is Turkey and Libya have a very special, unique relationship? And the answer is in two words: history and culture. Indeed, Turkey and Libya have a deep-rooted relationship, well-grounded in history. It is 470 years at least. And here we go back to 1551. Tripoli, or the west of Libya, was under the occupation of the Knights of St. John from Malta. So Libyans, or mainly Tripolitanians, sent a distress call to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire in Istanbul, Suleiman al-Qanuni, asking for help. Libyans, fellow Muslims, asked the Ottoman Empire to help the Libyans free their country, free Tripoli, liberated from the conquerors of the Knights of St. John. And indeed, the Ottoman Empire answered the call, and Navy frigates were sent with arms and with army officers who would train the Libyans later on. A huge force was sent, headed by Dargut Pasha and Sinan Pasha and others. It arrived 20 kilometers east of Tripoli, on the shores of a well-known area east of Tripoli called Tajura. The weapons and the officers went in and started organizing the Libyans and started training them and arming them. And within a few weeks or few months, the Libyans managed to fight the Knights of St. John and expel them from Libya and liberate Tripoli and at least most of the west of Libya. And then the Libyans opted to join the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Islamic Empire at that time. And Libya remained under or part of the Ottoman Empire, like the rest of North Africa, the rest of most of the Middle East, and most of the Islamic world, until 1911, when Italy conquered Libya, or colonized Libya. Therefore, there is a deep-rooted historical, cultural, religious relationship, a unique relationship between Turkey and Libya. It was a relationship based on mutual help. It's based on support, based on answering the call for help and answering any distress call. Now, this deep-rooted relationship, as I said, history, culture, religion, many other aspects, has remained throughout for 470 years. Today, we have many families in Tripoli, Libyan families in Tripoli, in Musrata, in Benghazi, in Zliten, in many parts, who actually have Turkish names and who carry Turkish blood and who are from Turkish descendant. So therefore, the relationship is unique. Now, as we say, sometimes history repeats itself. What do I mean by that? Well, in 1551, the Libyans asked for help from the Ottomans, from Istanbul, to liberate themselves or to fend against external threat. In 2019, again, the legitimate government in Libya, the GNA, the Government of National Accord, sent a help call to Turkey, to Istanbul, or to Ankara, and asked for help. And again, fellow Turks answered the call, and they sent help to save Tripoli, to save the capital, to save the legitimate government, and to save the whole concept or the aspiration of Libyans achieving a transition to a democratic or a constitutional state. We were under a major threat from a counter-revolution, from a military attack, coordinated attack supported by many countries, the attack of Haftar on Tripoli on the 4th of April 2019. So the agreement that the GNA entered with Turkey into, the military agreement, the maritime agreement, was a totally legitimate and transparent agreement between two governments. So this makes now the involvement of Turkey in Libya totally different from many other countries, like Dr. Zubair has already alluded to. What do I mean by that? Turkey's involvement in Libya was based on a legitimate agreement between two governments, totally legal in international law. Turkey's involvement in Libya recently, military involvement, was only towards the end of 2019 and 2020 and so on. Whereas the involvement of other countries, if we want to compare, is different. So that's why we cannot equate the involvement of Libya militarily and politically, the involvement of Turkey in Libya militarily and politically, equated with the involvement of other countries like Egypt, like the UAE, like France, like Russia. And it's really strange when Turkey and the GNA signed the security agreement. France went crazy. Macron was in uproar. He went mad. He was criticizing Turkey for this military involvement, for agonizing the situation in Libya, for deepening the divisions. And yet France was involved in Libya for many years before, illegally and not covertly. I mean, we remember in April 2016, 3 French soldiers died in around Benghazi, fighting on the side of Haftar. In June 2019, Javelin missiles traced back to be supplied by France, although they're American-made, but supplied by France to Haftar, were found in my own city, hometown, Daryan, supplied by France to Haftar. So to say, you know, for France to complain that Turkey, which came towards the end of 2019, early 2020, to accuse Turkey of antagonizing the situation and worsening the situation in Libya is a pure and sheer hypocrisy, because France has been doing exactly the same illegally for the last 6 years. Again, if we talk about the Emiratis, if we just follow the reports issued by the Sanctions Committee, the UN Sanctions Committee on Libya, who have been issuing reports since 2011 on what's going on in Libya in terms of arms and so on, you will see that Egypt, the Emiratis, the French, and the Russians have been supplying arms and fueling the conflict in Libya since 2014. And yet, they would not admit to it because it's illegal. When Putin was asked, do you have soldiers in Libya? He said, no, we do not have soldiers fighting in Libya who belong to the Russian government and paid by the Russian government. He's absolutely right, because the Wagner mercenaries who work for Russia, as we know in many parts of the world, are not paid by Russia. They are on the payroll of Mohammed bin Zayed of the UAE. So what I'm trying to say is Turkey's involvement in Libya, which only came in the last 1.5 years or 2 years, is totally different from the detrimental, illegal involvement of other countries on the side of Haftar. This has to be always made very clear. What Turkey is doing in Libya is totally transparent, is totally legal. It is between two governments recognized. The Libyan government is the legitimate recognized government, and it is a relationship that is grounded in deep-rooted history and common culture. That is my first introduction and point. Now, let me just briefly come on to say a few things about what role can Turkey play in Libya. Now that we established that the relationship is unique, that it is very close, that it is not strange or new that we see Turkey getting involved with Libya, even since the colonization of Libya by Italy, even when Libya gained independence in 1951, even with the monarchy for 18 years between 1951 and 1969, even through the Gaddafi era, Turkey have always had good, close relationships with Libya. Turkey has always supported Libya. Let me give you a small anecdote. Many years ago, I met with a well-known Libyan personality called Mustafa bin Halim. He was a prime minister during the monarchy era in the 50s. And he was telling to me, he was telling me how during his era when he was a prime minister, Libya and Turkey were very close. Turkey was providing a lot of support for the new state in Libya. Libya only became what is known as the modern Libya today in 1951. That's when it got independent. And yet in the early years of that independence, Turkey was still helping Libya, working with various governments, including the government of Mustafa bin Halim, who is still alive until today, who I met few times and was detailing to me how close the relationship between Libya and Turkey is. So when we talk about the role of Turkey in Libya today, we are not talking about somebody who's coming new. We are not talking about a relationship which is strange. We are talking about a unique, special relationship that is deep-rooted, well-grounded, and well-justified. But now let me ask, what can Turkey do in Libya? What kind of role can Turkey play in Libya? I think there are at least 4 or 5 areas which Turkey can help and can contribute to Libya, and I will come to the reconstruction, obviously, towards the end. The first area, which is for me is probably the most important, is that Turkey, being such a strong country, such a strong economy, especially in the last 20 years, with high technology, with high military technology, with a very strong, powerful army, the second most powerful army in NATO, Turkey can now help Libya to stabilize, can help Libya go through a second chance of stabilization and state building. Why do I say second chance? Because we had a first chance towards the end of 2011. When the Gaddafi regime was brought down, of course, the UN played a crucial role. The UN played a crucial role through Resolution 1973. Then United States, UK, and France played a crucial role in implementing that resolution. They provided military support to protect civilians. They helped Libyans bring down the Gaddafi regime, although there were no boots on the ground, there were no foreign troops that came from those countries or others on the ground inside Libya to help Libyans bring down the Gaddafi regime. Nevertheless, those 3 countries, America, Britain, and France, played a crucial role. But immediately after the downfall of the Gaddafi regime, what happened? Libya found itself in a vacuum, in a security vacuum, in a political vacuum. Did those countries continue to support the governments in Libya and the Libyans in general to stabilize the country quickly, to fill the security vacuum, to help with the political transition and the political process? I don't think they did. I think they will all admit now that they actually failed Libyans in that area. And even President Obama himself once said, he said, my biggest mistake in Libya is that I never thought about the morning after, meaning we never planned for the time immediately after the downfall of the Gaddafi regime. So in a sense, those 3 countries, they just walked away. Yes, they sent their companies, they wanted to gain business quickly, but Libya was not stabilized enough to even start reconstruction and provide business opportunities. So they walked away, possibly from remembering talking to some of the Western diplomats. Possibly they had the justification that they say, we didn't want to stay and appear as if we were ruling Libya, as if we were dictating things in Libya, with the hindsight of what happened in Iraq and Burma and all that bad experience. I think they say that they wanted to show that they left the Libyans to their own devices so that they are not appearing to be interfering and dictating and ruling the show in Libya immediately post the downfall of the regime. But yet they failed in supporting Libyans in institution building, in capacity building, in actually putting enough pressure to fend off those who interfered negatively in Libya. So that is one point. So Turkey now can, with Libyans, give us a second chance for institution, state building, stabilization of Libya, and so on. Another thing that Turkey can help very quickly now, help Libyans in a big way, is actually generally stabilizing Libya security-wise, and that has already, a lot of that has already been achieved. You know, when Turkey came in and supported GNA to fight back and fend off the military attack, the counter-revolution, the Haftar attack sponsored by Egypt, the Emiratis, the French, and the Russians. Some countries criticized that, and they said Turkey were just exacerbating the situation. In fact, what turned out to be is completely the opposite. Turkey managed to help Libyans save Tripoli, save the legitimate government, push back Haftar's mercenaries 500 kilometers east, and then look at all the war crimes we have discovered in Tarhuna, for example. All these mass graves we still find until today. Imagine if the Haftar militias stayed in Tarhuna until now, or stayed in Tarhuna even few months more. A lot more war crimes would have been committed. So in that sense, Turkey has contributed positively in stabilizing the legitimate government, in achieving a balance of power, in achieving an equilibrium, and in pushing back the Haftar forces, and in also making sure that this counter-revolution, this military campaign to take Libya back to military rule and to dictatorship has actually failed. And indeed, it has failed. And I think the role of Turkey in that was absolutely significant and crucial. So that's what I mean by stabilization of Libya. But now Turkey can do more. Turkey, I think, can help with the success of the current ongoing political process run by UNSMIL, by the United Nations, or supervised by the United Nations. Turkey now can, through its relationship with Russia, with the United States, with other countries, even the ongoing dialogue we hear about between Turkey and Egypt now, Turkey can play a crucial role in making sure that these countries are all aligned towards helping Libyans to complete this political process, this political agreement. So that should lead to elections. Helping elections in Libya is very important. I think Turkey has consistently said that it supports a political agreement, a political solution, and that Libyans go towards elections to elect the people who will lead them. Similar statements are coming out from the United States, from the European Union, from the UK, and I think that's good. This kind of international alignment is very important, and Turkey can play a crucial role in gathering this international alignment. I think also Turkey, with a strategic long-term relationship, close relationship with Libya, can help Libyans complete this transition, political transition, to its final conclusion and reach a permanent status very soon. We originally in 2011, we expected this transition to take between 2 to 3 years. Now it's already 10 years and we're still not there. So the sooner we get to this permanent status, the better. The sooner this transition is ended, the better. And I think Turkey can play a crucial role in that. What I mean by that, I mean achieving a permanent constitution upon which Libyans can regularly have presidential and parliamentary elections. Obviously, that in itself is not enough. It needs to be underpinned by institution building and by a state building. And here, I think Turkey can play a crucial role in the rebuilding of vital institutions to do with security, because unless we guarantee security in Libya, nothing else will work. Without security, we cannot have a political process. Without security, we cannot have economic development. Without security, we cannot have reconstruction. So security is key, and the key to achieving security and stability for all Libyans is to actually build security institutions to replace the phenomena of militias. The militias have been filling this vacuum. What we need is SSR. We need security sector reform, and we need that process to be completed as soon as possible. And I think Turkey can make a huge contribution to that, working with the legitimate government of Libya, whether it's the current government or any government that will come. Another help Turkey can provide for Libyans is overall capacity and state building. Also, that is very important. What I mean by that, I mean other institutions, political institutions, judicial institutions, institutions to do with transparency, with good governance. I think these are very, very important state institutions that need to be built, and we need a lot of capacity to help build and run those institutions much better than what we have been in the last 10 years. We have a huge problem of endemic corruption, and that corruption can only be reduced and contained and hopefully curtailed back or rolled back by strengthening institutions to do with transparency, good governance, and judicial and rule of law and judicial institutions. Finally, let me come to the main issue of reconstruction. Indeed, Libya is going to need reconstruction across all sectors, absolutely all sectors. But that reconstruction can only start in earnest once we have achieved the security stability and the political resolution and the completion of this political transition. Once we have that, then yes, reconstruction should start in earnest, and Libya is going to need reconstruction across absolutely all sectors. Energy sectors, absolutely vital. Power, electricity, solar energy. There are dire needs right now. There are shortages of power and electricity. Transport needs. Libyan airports are very poor, very weak. Libyans cannot travel easily. We need transport across all transport aspects of Libya. Healthcare, infrastructure, education. We can talk about other housing. We can talk about tourism. We can talk about trade, transit trade, Libyan ports, vital ports who can be absolutely strategic for key transit trade into Africa. One always wonders, why does the UAE, the Emiratis, 5,000–6,000 kilometers away, get so much involved in Libya? Illegally and illegitimately and fueling conflict. One of the answers is the potential that Libya has for transit trade, for development, for investment, for tourism, all that, because the Emiratis see Libya as the biggest competitor to their model in the whole of the Middle East and North Africa. So transit trade is an area for reconstruction as well. So yes, reconstruction historically, over the last 50 years, Turkish companies have contributed a lot. They have played major role, even during the Gaddafi era and before, as I highlighted earlier, in the 50s and 60s. And now they can do it again. The Turkish companies have the knowledge, the local knowledge. They have the cultural closeness with the Libyan society, and they have the quality that Libyans appreciate as well. So Turkey is well positioned now to play a major role in the reconstruction of Libya, whereby Libya in the coming years and decades is probably going, once it stabilizes, probably going to spend hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars for this major reconstruction and development in order for the Libyan people to fulfill their aspirations for prosperity and so on. But let me just put one point, that's the final point in 30 seconds. For Turkey, for 30 seconds. It's already,
okay, inshallah.
30 seconds. For Turkey to make this major contribution for reconstruction, it needs to develop a strategic partnership and long relationship with Libya and across all aspects of Libya, not just military relationship. The coordination, the level of coordination militarily now between Turkey and Libya is very high and is very sophisticated. You can see defense ministers almost meeting every 2 weeks. But what Turkey needs to do is to match this high level of military engagement, match it with also high level of sophisticated political, cultural, and economic engagement with Libyans, with other segments of Libyan society, political parties, civil society, economic powers, and academics and intellectuals, and so on. So what we need is strong bonds and bridges with all sectors and all dimensions of Libyan society. I think this strategic relationship will succeed, and I think it will be there for decades to come, inshallah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gamaty, for your kind and detailed presentation. Thank you very much. As he has just mentioned, it is quite ironic to see that Turkey, unfortunately, is the only country which has been effectively supporting the UN-recognized government in Libya. All other actors, regional or global, in theory, most of them they also recognize the legitimacy of the GNA government in theory, but in practice, on the ground, they have been supporting the challenger General Haftar. So it is ironic to see this power equation on the ground. As Dr. Gamaty has mentioned, yes, that's true. Turkey has been intervening the crisis quite differently from other regional and global powers. And Turkey has been contributing quite a lot in the reconstruction and restructuring of the state buildings and state capacity of the Libyan state. Now we will look at the other side of the medallion. Timothy Reid will make a presentation about the French intervention and in the crisis, and his fellow, which he calls strange bedfellow, that is Francis Emmanuel Macron's autocratic friends, who are the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Russian Wagner mercenaries, and Sudan's Janjaweed mercenaries. So he will focus on this strange relationship, strange bedfellows, how they influence the power equation in the Libyan crisis. Timothy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ataman. I have a PowerPoint presentation. There you go. So very glad to be here today. Let me see if we just move to the next slide. Okay. Sorry. Can you still see me? So the question is, if you look at these two photos, how did we get from the slide on the left to the slide on the right? So if you look at the history, first of all, I'd like to say also the opinions expressed are my own, and I'm not purporting to represent the United Nations, who I used to work for, or anyone else. And this is, as mentioned, about the strange alliances that France has made in these last years, not just in the Libya case, but in some others. And the attempt to oppose Khalifa Haftar. We're going to look at what is the French position, what's behind it. And I also want to insist that questioning French foreign policy does not mean that one is necessarily anti-French. I consider myself a Francophile. I, of course, speak French, coming from the province of Quebec in Canada. I studied in France. It's one of my favorite countries, and I've had many great, French colleagues that I've worked with. So in the past, France has often taken very courageous decisions and actions that showed a lot of great leadership. So just to disagree somewhat with Dr. Zabir, I would say that when France intervened to overthrow Gaddafi, we could say, or to intervene in right to protect, depending how one interprets it, President Sarkozy, who was one of the initial leaders of that, he was actually sort of going against some of his own interests. By that stage, most of the Western world had become reconciled with Gaddafi. He was not being a problem at all to their interests, whether it be oil or anything else. In particular, in France, people might remember that Sarkozy even allowed Gaddafi to pitch his tent on the lawns of the Élysée Palace, and there was some issues with his human rights minister, Rachid Haddadi, who did criticize this. But everything was rather cozy prior to 2011 between Gaddafi and Sarkozy, and yet Sarkozy, at the insistence, funnily enough, of Bernard-Henri Lévy, and also with after having met a number of Libyan revolutionaries, he decided to risk these interests and to encourage other Western leaders also to engage in this operation. I'd also like to say that as I was the initially senior DDR advisor and later senior defense reform advisor. I agree with many of the comments that were made. The international community was very reluctant to get seriously involved, and I guess they had fatigue and also felt that, you know, Libya had wealth enough, and yet they didn't appreciate the situation that the country was in after 42 years of Gaddafi, and a very brutal revolution, that violent revolution that took place. On the other hand, also there was a lot of reluctance then, as there is today, unfortunately, amongst many Libyan actors to have a proper international presence that could really help and do things in a structured and coherent way. Many of the people that I dealt with, you know, just said, "Oh, all we need is more weapons, and we don't need any outside help, and we'll just do it on our own." And we saw what that led to, and I think we're in danger of doing it again today, but that's probably the subject of another conference. Sadly, though, following 2013, gradually France has become taken a more and more pro-authoritarian bent in its foreign policy, and this is particularly so under President Macron. What many would describe as very transactional behavior, and you know, they may think that they're getting short-term benefits. I personally believe that this is going to have long-term harmful consequences. So it seems as if President Macron and particularly his foreign minister Le Drian have really taken a personal interest. It's kind of made it a personal quest to install Khalifa Haftar, and in doing so, they've aligned themselves, as many of the colleagues have mentioned, with Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Russia, Janjaweed mercenaries, and these are all the people you would think that they would not necessarily be cozying up to and even be against. And as has been mentioned, these states of, you know, many of even though France claims to be acting to combat violent Islamic terrorism, many of these states in questions are the ones who furnish those who participated in the terrorist acts in 9/11 in New York and in other places. And they have, as has been mentioned, they've been supporting what many would call terror in Libya and elsewhere. And they've generally attempted to install regimes that they deem sufficiently authoritarian. And this may be more thoroughly dealt with by some of the colleagues in the subsequent commentaries and maybe in the Q&A. My own personal feeling is that this comes from maybe the insecurity that some of these regimes feel. Certainly, this is also the case with Russia when it intervened in Ukraine, and you know, I look at a state like the UAE, which now has a majority of its population which are not citizens. The sort of initial tribal, you know, binds that links that kept people together in the early days of the state, maybe fraying a bit with all the development and wealth. And so the whole idea of sort of democratic movements that may challenge this, the model that's in a state like the UAE or Saudi Arabia is probably something that worries them, and this may explain some of their actions. Anyways, as has been mentioned already, they've been intervening in Libya for a number of years now, and they've with finance and either sending or financing mercenaries, providing logistics support, using their public relations and media assets on Haftar's behalf, and promoting this quietist ideology, Madkhali, which very much suits their purpose, where you have a very conservative social views with unquestioning loyalty to a secular leader. So this is, I guess, the type of regime which they would like to see in Libya, which would somewhat model their own. Coming to France, Haftar himself has said that France has helped his cause like no other country. So clearly, France has played a very large role. What has it provided Haftar with? Some mention of this already. Special forces, intelligence assets, which included both French and mercenary groups, which they've hired to help, security experts, evidence of some weapons, as has been mentioned, and also very much their diplomatic influence, where they've used it in the UN Security Council, in the EU, and in NATO. Why is Macron's government doing this? There's a number of possible explanations. Some of it could be Islamophobia, as we've seen several times. President Macron has talked about Islamic separatism in France, and he really seems to conflate political Islam with Islamic extremism and terrorism, which is not something that I personally agree with, but he has sort of gotten it into his head, whether this is a convenient excuse or whether this is something he truly believes. But there does seem to be an element of this in his discourse, which seems often a bit hysterical. He also often invokes the issue of refugees. He seems to be terrified of massive waves of refugees coming into Europe and France in particular. And yet, at the same time, he's got this real hostility to Turkey, which has taken in more refugees than all the EU countries combined. So, again, one has to question the legitimacy of this position. Economic interests have also been alluded to already, and indeed, France has had economic interests since before the overthrow of Gaddafi, and now that it has made its pact with Haftar, Haftar has promised to reward France for supporting him, and probably Macron worries that what is going to happen to the existing French interests if Haftar either loses or is not playing an important part in any new peace deal. But one of the major issues, I would argue, is weapons sales. So if we look at the last several years, since 2013, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Bahrain, and there's a mistake there. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates are amongst France's most important clients. So, the sales to each of those countries dwarfs the sales of weapons to many other whole regions in the world. And particularly so since over the last 7 years, bringing in billions of euros every year. And these, in turn, also help support the development and production of weapon systems for the French military itself, which means that by selling a lot of these weapons to these countries, France is not dependent on other countries to develop weapons for its military. France even has, since a number of years now, a permanent base in the United Arab Emirates. So France has definitely tied itself to the interests of these important weapons clients, and it seems like it is often acting at their behest as a sort of part of its partnership in selling them all these weapons. So if we look at this table, you can see I've just included the region, the Middle East, North African region here. You can see that in the Middle East, the growth, the incredible growth in weapons sales over the last years, and so you see, interestingly enough, though, in 2019, suddenly there's a very large spike of sales to Qatar. So you have to wonder whether France will change its tune at all, or put some water in its wine, as the expression goes. Now that Qatar has become an important client, since Qatar has been supporting the GNA along with Turkey and Italy. So this is the crux of my argument. I've tried to sort of explain some of the strategic factors that may be encouraging France to support Haftar so strong, especially considering that Haftar is someone who they once fought against in Chad when he was one of Gaddafi's important generals. So on that, I think I've just under 15 minutes. So I will wait for the Q&A session to talk some more. So back to you, Dr. Ataman.
Timothy, for your kind consideration regarding the timing. It is really quite ironic to see that they, in the name of combating against, in quotation marks, Islamic terrorists, many regional and global powers, they have been supporting Haftar in his struggle against the Muslim Brotherhood supported government based in Tripoli, that is the GNA government. However, as you have just mentioned, indirectly and directly and indirectly, most of these autocratic regimes in the Middle East, such as the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, these autocratic and monarchical regimes, they consider political Islam, whether it is democratic or not, they consider this, especially the mainstream one, the mainstream political movement, as the biggest threat directed to their regime. Therefore, they have been strongly opposing any mainstream political Islamic movements or political parties in the region. Ironically, they have been utilizing some of the most radical groups, such as the Madkhali Salafis, for instance, and they have hired Janjaweed mercenaries and these radical Salafist groups to fight on the side of Haftar. So utilizing a more radical version of militants against mainstream political actors in the region. It is ironic and paradoxical to see that the democratic France, the French government, they have been supporting all these autocratic and despotic actors in the Libyan crisis. Now I want to give the floor to Tariq Majrisi, who will focus on the role of the European Union. We all know that the European Union is one of the champions of the liberal democracy, not only in Europe, but in the world. So we will try to understand whether the EU can achieve a common policy towards the Libyan crisis or not, since we see that there are some significant differences between the Italian perception and the French one. So the Germany and some other member countries, they have been a kind of playing a mediator role between these two extremes. So what is your opinion regarding this? The floor is yours, Dr. Majrisi.
Thank you, Dr. Ataman. But I should say before we start that I'm probably the only one here who is not a doctor. I'm still just Mr. Majrisi.
Sorry.
Thank you to Inside Turkey for inviting me to be here today and to speak amongst you all. I'll try to unpack some of the main dynamics that you mentioned here on the difference between the EU and its member states, as well as what I put in my contributed article on European engagement with Libya. From afar, over the last few years, Europe may appear to be the most involved of Libya's external actors. The majority of SRSGs, of special representatives of the United Nations since 2011 have been European. It was Europeans that drove the creation of the Government of National Accord to try to put the civil war of 2014 back in the box. It was Italians that delivered President Sarraj and his cabinet to Tripoli. And Europeans were at the forefront of both the campaign from a coalition of Western Libyan militias to liberate Sirte from Daesh, from ISIS, however you want to call them. And as has been mentioned by others, Europeans or French in particular, were at the front of this self-declared yet kind of hotly disputed counter-terror operation launched by Haftar and Benghazi. And more recently, the Berlin process has been the preeminent international framework for engagements with Libya. But the reality is that perhaps apart from individual or pursuing individual interests such as combating the war on terror or the migration threat, Europeans may have been the most prominent actors, but for more than a few years they have been resting on their laurels or ignoring Libya's festering crisis for a number of reasons. And as a result, they have been overtaken and their interests have been overrun by other intervening states who are now calling the shots to a much greater degree. To better understand, European engagement with Libya, and we have to be aware of two issues which are commonly overlooked by observers and which you brought up in your introduction. Foreign policy within Europe remains the preserve of member states rather than the EU. And so the EU is usually limited to dealing with institutionalized positions requiring administrative power. Secondly, Libya inhabits quite a strange place within European foreign policy, which I've alluded to just before, where there are important interests within Libya, yet Libya as an entity in itself is never really a priority. If anything, it's something that all are wary of engaging or proverbially owning. So we see a lot of weight behind dealing with the symptoms of Libya's crisis, like migration or counterterrorism or entrenchment from other powers. But since 2011's intervention, we haven't really seen any real political capital invested in Libya itself. So there have been two tiers of European engagement with Libya, especially since the inflection point of 2014. There has been that of the European Union and that of the member states of the European Union. The EU has engaged with kind of widely or mutually perceived threats amongst its member states, namely migration. And at the same time, it's tried to signal boost, if you would, established multilateral positions such as United Nations Security Council resolutions on Libya. EU priorities in Libya tend to reflect kind of the most keenly felt European threat of the time, as well as positions of the dominant member states on that issue. So initially there was a strong focus on migration, especially following the Central Mediterranean migration crisis of 2015, whereby at times you had hundreds of thousands of people crossing per month from the shores of Libya to Italy. And this resulted in Operation Sophia, which targeted people smuggling networks, whilst working with Libyan militias who by virtue of kind of their geographic origins or where in the country they come from and inhabit, had been institutionalized as a coast guard or as those responsible for running a detention center. And it was also reflected in more structural positions, such as the EU's use of the Trust Fund for Africa to fund stabilization projects in Libya on more medium to long-term counter-migration policies to help Libya absorb economic migrants as it once did, in the pre-revolutionary times, but also to try and make the lives of refugees and migrants in Libya tolerable or perhaps even humane, so that the EU could potentially begin processing refugee claims on African soil rather than on European shores. But as the situation changed, Italy's Minniti doctrine created a much more comfortable situation for Europeans on the migration. Tripoli came, and along it came these stepped-up interventions from Russia, from the UAE, from Turkey as well, and this created new threats. One of strategic rivals that are entrenching, and a rapidly spiraling and devolving conflict, and so new and overwhelming need for Europe was to try and help dampen tensions and to stabilize the political situation before it all kind of just spun out of control. And new powers came in and fully eclipsed Europe and European influence. And this evolution in Libya's threat profile to Europe can be witnessed in the evolution of Operation Sophia to becoming Operation Irene, which sought to monitor and in some limited ways enforce the United Nations Security Council arms embargo on Libya, but also some of the other resolutions that sought to control the buying and selling of oil and refined products, which were crucial to Haftar's war effort and his ability to maintain a kind of breakaway part of the country in a renegade status. And here in this much more contentious atmosphere of this international pylon behind different sides of a civil war and in support of different goals, we also see the problems in this kind of duality of foreign policies where member states are not always fully aligned, and the effect this can have on the more abstracted or the higher EU level. And there were a lot of long-winded discussions before it could become institutionalized, because states like Austria and Hungary were still fully focused and animated by the migration issue rather than Libya's other geopolitical threats. And so they held up progress to ensure that they could pull support and pull exacerbating migration by creating a pull factor. Meanwhile, Operation Irene's ability to monitor violations of the arms embargo, which was always really its main raison d'etre, given the impossibility of actually enforcing an arms embargo in a legal way in terms of stopping ships on the high seas, but also in preventing air freighters and cross-border on land deliveries of weapons, which is the majority of weapons delivered to Libya and in support of Haftar. But this ability to monitor and then do something with this evidence was weakened by the fact that different European member states were either backing sides of the war or kind of just generally walking on eggshells to secure particular interests amidst the highly competitive environment of a war, rather than being fully behind the kind of normative track towards de-escalation. So this mountain of collected evidence never really gets put to much meaningful work at either UN or EU or even nation-state levels, and trying to help disincentivize states who just flagrantly violate the arms embargo and continue to do so today. And this is a nice segue into looking at the member state policy side of Europe's engagement with Libya. And if the EU side could be considered broad-based, then the member state side of the policy coin is kind of the exact opposite. It's highly localized. You could almost say blinkered in some respects, and it tends to eschew big picture strategy for the tactical, fairly limited interests of the capital. And this is probably the best depiction of why the GNA was created in 2015, only to then be completely undermined in subsequent years as different member states sought to directly intervene to secure counter-terror and counter-migration goals. And why we ended up with France and Italy working at odds to one another for 4 or 5 years, only for both to be completely overwhelmed by the bigger picture, which we should have all seen coming, as Haftar predictably launched an assault that could never really succeed, and a prolonged period of state failure and civil war predictably led to widened avenues for other states to intervene and entrench in a manner. Germany, through the Berlin process and their corresponding roles at the time, either at the United Nations Security Council on the Sanctions Committee, or their time as president of the EU Commission, was perhaps the only European entity who took that strategic role, and they did so in a way which highlights the kind of divergent geopolitical views of different leading capitals within Europe. Whilst Paris and Rome and others sought to really just take part in this great game style of politics which had enveloped Libya, attempting to enter the fray and secure their perceived interests for better or worse, Berlin was a lot more philosophical, seemingly concerned that this great game dynamic was an accepted reality in the first place and was only being reinforced by states which should know better. And so in the kind of generally hostile global environment to the concepts of multilateralism and international norms that was being set and sustained by the Trump administration, Germany felt obliged and almost like it was the only one flying the flag for these, concepts of international norms, of multilateral approaches and de-escalation in a kind of cooperative framework. And so it sought to assert this with the Berlin process. And, although these competing trends and geopolitical visions weakened the Berlin process's ability to really tie in the states involved into the commitments they made at the conference, which took place in Berlin almost a year ago, the virtue of that format of engagement, of regular interactions by all intervening parties and having this forum where all could convene and regularly discuss different aspects of the crisis, it shone through and it kind of showed itself immediately after the collapse of Haftar's forces and his assault on Tripoli in June 2020. And you can make a case to say that, this forum as a talking shop, the familiarity it engendered had played a part to become part of an effective safety net that really stopped the free fall of a situation. After countries like Egypt were left panicking that their core strategic interests were now under threat as Haftar had complete disarray. And today Europeans are settling back into familiar positions as Libya in turn kind of settles back into familiar divisions, which the current UN process and background policies of intervening states have helped to restore. Going forward, I think Libya will be the single biggest test of how true Europe's recent pretensions of becoming more geopolitical and developing its strategic autonomy will actually be. Libya remains a key foreign policy issue. How key it is, I think, depends on where you're looking from. But to lay it out plainly, Libya has become a fountain almost of destabilizing forces and dynamics, which sits at the heart of the Mediterranean and the heart of what Europe calls its southern neighborhood. As a result, it's inflaming other key theaters such as the Eastern Mediterranean and the Sahel, making them more difficult to resolve. It's threatening the stability of countries like Algeria and Tunis, which is the only democracy of the region, and perhaps most dangerously of all, it's Libya's current reality as a failed and contested state poses direct security threats to Europe. And this is best exhibited by Russia's recent entrenchment, its exploitation of Libya's civil war, of the lack of any Libyan entity to truly govern the country, to A, get involved, B, sustain a presence, and now actually entrench at key military sites, including air bases and a naval port, which sit only a few hundred kilometers from Sicily. So, going forward, watching, how capable European countries are of working together and working through the EU to engage with intervening states, such as Turkey and such as Egypt as well, and how capable they are of building a workable modus vivendi towards stabilizing Libya. But also, perhaps more importantly, how assertively or successfully Europeans can now shepherd this frail UN process towards a successful outcome, and by doing so prevent their own marginalization by other intervening powers such as Russia and Turkey and the United Arab Emirates. These will be the key dynamics to watch, and I think a very useful benchmark to see just how geopolitical and animal the Europe of 2021 is. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much again, Dr. Ataman.
Much, Mr. Tariq Mejlisi, for your insightful presentation. And we came to the end of our presentations now. I want to ask some questions which we have gathered from the different digital platforms. The first question is as follows. The US has largely stayed in the background until now. One of our one of our viewers is asking, how do you think Biden's ascendance to power will change the US attitude towards Libya? Are you expecting a continuity or a revision? To you, Dr. Yahya Zubair.
Well, am I connected? I cannot see myself.
Yes, you are.
Okay, sorry. You know, the Libya never represented a sort of strategic position in U.S. policy. If anything, it's an either annoyance or second, basically, it's up to the Europeans to deal with Libya. It is in their doorsteps. As far as the conflict is concerned, I think somebody mentioned earlier, I think Dr. El-Gamaty, about President Trump stating that, sorry, Obama, one of his regrets was the war in Libya. He followed, you know, some of his advisors and basically Hillary Clinton in this particular case, and Samantha Power, so on, who intervened. The U.S. was present, believe it or not, during this entire period, but it was focused on one particular thing, which is the basically the war on terror. Used a lot of drones, used a lot of facilities to find the groups, ISIS in particular, especially in 2015. But it did, I think, the bombings, the sorties ended in around 2019, basically. So it was in a sort of a low key. Now, the question of the member of the audience is, what about Biden, President Biden? My 2 cents is that President Biden would not pay that much attention to Libya. It would not be on the list of priorities, maybe on some humanitarian ground, or one of the main preoccupations for the United States in the past was whether Russia would establish a military base, or I mean a naval base in Libya. That's basically what would be of concern to the United States. But other than that, I do not expect major U.S. involvement in Libya. They'll be watching from behind. Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zubair. Now we have another question from another audience. Will the Gulf Cooperation Council normalization, that is the rapprochement, the most recent rapprochement between Qatar and other Gulf countries, will impact the Libyan crisis? I want to ask this question to Dr. Gamaty. Your mic is off, Dr. Gamaty.
Yes, you're right. Yes. Is it on now? Yes. Good, thank you for that. Yes. Before addressing that question, I'd just like to clarify to Dr. Zubair that what I said is that Obama said that one of his biggest mistakes is that he never planned for the morning after. That means he did not plan for the time after the fall of the Gaddafi regime, which is the vacuum that all these international companies failed to address or to help the Libyans with. Maybe later on he said he regretted the whole involvement in the war. That's something else. But for sure, he admitted that there was a failure to plan for the post fall of the Gaddafi regime. And I think it's a failure for UK and France as well, as they were involved at that time. GCC rapprochement and this deal between the main Gulf countries, I think it will impact on Libya simply because one of the reasons why the Emiratis in particular and the Saudis as well have isolated Qatar and launched and got involved in this attack on Qatar on all aspects, like isolation and embargoes and so on, is because they say that Qatar was also supporting Islamist groups in Libya and sponsoring, in their terms, what they called terrorism. Also, I think Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis, once they took this aggressive open stand against Qatar, they went full speed with supporting Haftar. And one of the facts is that Saudi Arabia was also involved in supporting Haftar. It is an accurate information, I was told by a senior diplomat, that actually Haftar, prior to his attack on Tripoli on the 4th of April, a week or 10 days later before that, which we remember very well, has visited Saudi Arabia and met with the king and the crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, and he was offered a lot of financial support to the extent of about half $500 million, almost $500 million in his campaign. And Haftar promised Saudi Arabia that within 2 weeks he will call them from the center of Tripoli once he's taken over. So they were heavily engaged in supporting Haftar. Now that they have made this U-turn against Qatar and what Qatar stands for, I think Saudi Arabia will be moderating its position in Libya, will probably take a step back from fully or actively supporting Haftar, which means that the Emiratis will be isolated within their surrounding. So that was the question: can the Emiratis afford to be isolated from their key Gulf allies in their policy vis-a-vis Libya? I think, by the way, the Emiratis are already a little bit isolated in the sense that Egypt is drifting away from the Emirati line in Libya, and Russia is also drifting away from the Emirati line, and France is drifting away somehow from the Emirati line. So all this makes the Emiratis far more isolated, with Saudi probably moving away as well, and with the Qataris, we know where the Qataris stand, totally against Haftar. So yes, in that way, I think the Emiratis' involvement in Libya will be weakened, as we know that the Emiratis always championed arming Haftar and supporting Haftar in his military campaign and doing whatever they could to help Haftar take over power by force. But that campaign has failed. So maybe this will make the Emiratis either revise their position, revise their strategy, or somewhat limit their involvement and will not be as aggressive as they were before. Add to that Biden has come in, and the Emiratis enjoyed a lot of support from Trump as well, almost a green light from Trump to do whatever they wanted in the Middle East and North Africa. So now the coming in of Biden, will that also change the American administration position somewhat towards Emiratis? Will that make them moderate their position towards Libya and Tunisia? That will be seen. But I think it definitely, what happened in the Gulf, it definitely may have a positive impact on Libya. That is my take on it.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. El-Gamaty. We have a question directed to Timothy. The question is as follows. It says, what are the potential ramifications of France's Libya policy, particularly with regard to ambitions and interests of France in Africa and the Middle East? The floor is yours, Timothy.
Okay, well, that's a very large question. Of course, a lot of it is linked to other French activities and interests in the region. So one of the big interests, which we didn't really get into that much, but which has been an element one way or another since the beginning, and which I did allude to before, that, you know, Haftar had actually been Gaddafi's general in Chad, you know, back when Gaddafi was trying to, you know, to take over a piece of Chad several decades ago. And after the 2011 revolution, and, you know, the Gaddafi had so many weapons scattered all over the country. And even you know, when I was speaking to Libyan officials back in 2012, 2013, and they were saying, you know, even Gaddafi himself didn't know where all the pieces were. You know, pieces of certain weapon systems could be found in one site and then another, and So there was just they were flowing all over the place. There were a number of fighters, as people may remember, particularly some of the members of Gaddafi's forces who he'd recruited from neighboring countries into his so-called Arab Legion and other forces, particularly ethnic groups which are located in the region, in the neighboring countries and in Libya, like the Tuaregs. So you know, some of those fighters then, at the end of the conflict in 2011, went back to you know, the neighboring countries, particularly Mali, and then that reignited the separatist aspirations of some groups in Mali, and then some extremists got involved as well, ISIL and so on, and then France intervened with Barkhane and so on. So this created this whole dynamic where, again, which was been in existence for a very long time, where France remains very involved in the Sahel, and Libya is very connected to the Sahel. So France somehow sees Libya as connected to the Sahel, but also there's a broader sort of move that we've seen. For example, you know, last year I was speaking at an event at the French Senate about, you know, events in the Great Lakes region, Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, Burundi, which is another area where I worked in a lot. And we saw, you know, back in the 90s, France was taking, somewhat similar to Libya, France was taking a great leadership role. France was, you know, one of the few countries that was willing to stand up to the Rwandan Patriotic Front, which invaded from Uganda, and which, you know, was a main actor, though it has been managed to use its propaganda machine to discount this in the genocide, and then invaded and occupied and continues to destabilize the Democratic Republic of Congo. So, you know, France had stood up to Paul Kagame and Yoweri Museveni and their efforts, and now we see France has installed a war criminal, Louise Mushikiwabo, who, as the head of the Francophonie, who is someone that it would have been opposed to before. So again, we see in Africa this, particularly under the direction of Monsieur Le Drian, who was, you know, previously defense minister under President Hollande, this sort of fondness for authoritarian leaders who, I guess they seem to feel, will somehow defend their interests and keep things stable in Africa. And it's unfortunate that it's adopted this position, but that seems to be the way it has been going in recent years. Okay, thank you very much, Timothy, for your answer. Now, I have two questions for Tariq Majlisi. One is directly asked to him. The other one is more general. Let me start with the general question. How is the position of international organizations? Can you talk a little bit about the policies of international organizations? We have already mentioned the EU and some briefly and indirectly about the role of the United Nations. I don't know, we may add maybe NATO in this context. So the position and the policies of international organizations. The second question is as follows. It says, how incoherence in EU policy towards Libya is perceived by the Libyan domestic actors and politicians? The floor is yours, Tariq.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ataman. Those are two very good questions. You know, on the first one on international organizations or multilateral organizations, I suppose the main organization involved is the United Nations. And what the position of the United Nations is that it's heavily under attack. It's essentially been a poison chalice since it first tried to stitch back together Libya's competing political factions in 2014. You know, they have been the unfortunate face of a process where, you know, UN member states claim to support, so much as it gives them cover for, you know, a reputable Libya policy, whilst they then seek to undermine that own UN track of work. It's something which helped to founder the GNA after it was formed, as you know, Aguila Saleh and the Eastern members of the Presidency Council were encouraged to boycott from the West and to set up Eastern Libya as almost a breakaway entity. It happened as well as the former SRSG, Ghassan Salame, tried to institute a big tent approach and to really reorient Libya's political trajectory, only for the political track to become this duality between Haftar and Sarraj that was skewed in Haftar's favor. But I think you get the impression the UN has been under attack since day one, and its track has always been undermined. There to keep everything together to the lowest extent possible, and then whenever it's expedient for other intervening states or they sense an opportunity, they don't hesitate to completely subvert or scupper that process for their personal goals. Other multilateral organizations, perhaps let's say the African Union, but the European Union, and the Arab League are good examples as well, are always kind of hovering around Libya, looking for ways to become more involved, looking for ways to project their combined interests onto Libya. For Europe, that's mainly been counter-migration, as I already explained. For the African Union, it's trying to assert sovereignty and to reclaim an African role, which they feel was stolen from them in 2011, and which they still blame Western authorities for. And they feel like Libya has become an African travesty, and so Africans should be more involved in resolving it. And for the Arab League, it's a position of de facto support behind Gulf attempts to reverse Libya's revolution. So it's none the more coherent or unified or harmonious than unilateral interventions in Libya. The second question on how European incoherence is reflected within Libya, I think Libyan politicians have become extremely adept at playing off the differences between European states. I think they know very well who European states are supporting, how much real support there is behind multilateral positions such as Germany's Berlin process or the UN track, and are guided by their other international backers to lean on the process or to lean on sensitive pressure points in order to extract the gains that they want. And I think this is entirely evident in the current political process, where we see individuals who are heavily backed by key states, such as Aguila Saleh. He's the Speaker of the House of Representatives, strongly backed by Egypt, and Fathi Bashagha, the current Minister of Interior, strongly backed by Turkey, being almost advanced before the process was put in place, as those who should be the future president and prime minister, and both of them doing tours and heavy lobbying efforts towards different Europeans, pushing different agendas. So European incoherence, it really hurts them on a strategic level, because it creates divisions and it creates gulfs of differences in position, which realpolitik players or perhaps more adept international players trade off and play off in order to strengthen the dependency of their associated Libyans upon them, and to weaken Europe's foothold or Europe's ability to influence the political process. Thank you.
Okay, Tarek, thank you very much for your answers. Now we came to the end of our panel. One more time, I really appreciate and I thank the contribution of our presenters. That is Dr. Yahya Zubir, Dr. Jum'a El-Gamaty, Timothy Reid, and Tarek Megrisi. So before closing the session, if you have any concluding remarks, please, you are welcome to make your concluding remarks, but quite briefly, please. If not, we will close the session.
It's fine. Just to say thank you very much for having us.
Okay,
thank you very
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's great seeing everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you for the invite. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Good evening, everybody. This is the end of our session. Thank you very